Black people, let me say this, because there's been a whole lot of speculation and shit that I've been hearing for the last about 2 years about us already being here on this land, us being the indigenous people of this land, the slave ships never happening, and all of that. And I'm gonna tell you why I don't believe it. And then, you could either hate it or love it. But I'm gonna tell you why I don't believe that we are indigenous of this land. And then you can prove me wrong in the comments like y'all already been trying to do when I be talking about going back to Africa. This is the reason why I don't believe we are the indigenous people of this land. The European people, or the whitey people, or whatever you want to call them, they didn't only colonize the United States of America. They colonized pretty much the whole damn world.
Now, we can say they colonized the whole world, but when we look at artifacts and when we look at ancient depictions of the medieval times of the Moors and different black families of nobility, in actuality, we colonized the world first. This is why they try to hide our history in Europe and the Americas and so forth. But there are a lot of our people that believe that we're strictly from Africa. They still try to push the Pan-Africanism or those type of doctrines. You really can't put your faith and trust in this public fools education system or the Rothschild system, because this is how they changed the names, taken over certain lands and blood ties or bloodlines of certain places all over the world. But like a lot of people have stated in the past, Africa is one continent, and then you have America. And of course, it went from black, Negro, and so forth. And this is why I have stated many times in my older videos, the so-called blacks of this captivity come from three main groups. The black Europeans that came over here with the quote-unquote white or so-called Caucasian Europeans, okay, in the 1500s. And then you have the West African Judeans, okay, 1800s. And then you have the Aboriginal black tribes that were already here in the Americas way before Columbus, okay, because Hebrews were traveling all over this world per se. So we can't really go by a lot of their conventional history and narratives. The Bible is our treasure map, okay? It's not the treasure itself.
Starting with Australia, you can go back and look at the people that are indigenous of that land, the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals are the original indigenous man of Australia. The Europeans came there and colonized that. But the only difference between those people and us is those people still speak their native language, they still go by their native names, and they still practice their native religion. They were not stripped of those things. The same thing with South Africa. All of the
This is why history and trying to understand real history is very important, because a lot of times our people can fall into that victimization. Oh, what's our original language? X, Y, and Z. But you have to remember, we taught them the Bible, okay? When you look at heraldry and you look at certain places in Europe with the Moors, crest head, okay, with the cross, we're the ones that taught them religion, believe it or not, okay? So even the notion of what's our original language, our people spoke majority of all languages, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, and so forth, English as well, okay? Because in all essence, we taught them how to speak, how to bathe, how to bath. They went to our universities and so forth. We're the ones that brought them out of the caves, or excuse me, we brought them out of the caveman age, meaning what? When they came out these caves, they had to learn or be civilized by our ancestors.
Countries in South Africa and Northern Africa that were colonized by the Europeans, those people still know their names, their original languages, and their original religion.
There are many books out there, like Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 and 2, Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles, The Origin of the Anglo-Saxon Race, that tells you that a lot of these ancient Germanic tribes were people of color, tawny, swarthy, etc. Even the notion of the surnames. See, we're taught here that our origin, begins with the so-called white man. But when you really study the etymology or look at the surnames, you're going to come to find out that we had those names first. They copied and pasted like they normally do, right? And they took on our surnames. But, with the public schools education system, they've taught us to believe that, we have their last names, when all actuality they have our last names, aka surnames.
And then when you come over here to the United States, you have the Native Americans. And they, like the rest of the world, still speak their original language, still go by their original names, and practice their original religion. Now, here it is, us, the Black Americans, the African Americans. We want to believe that we were already here and we are indigenous of this land. So you're trying to tell me that out of all the places in the world that the European people came and colonized, we are the only race of people on the face of the earth that they were able to brainwash?
No, sir. In all actuality, Africa has been brainwashed as well. Those people over there have Stockholm Syndrome just as much as our people. Some of our people have Stockholm Syndrome over here. Okay, it's through the public schools education system. Like I stated before and many times, our people are miseducated. Okay, well, for the most part, like many so-called blacks, their parents, whether you have a two-parent home or one parent, the majority of your education is going to come from the public schools education system. They're not going to talk about the so-called black history of medieval, dark ages, the history here in the Americas, okay, or the African history or the history in Asia and so forth, okay. They're only going to give you the cookie cutter. They're going to give you the slave narrative, that you were a slave and you always was a slave, even though that word wasn't originally applied to us. Okay, it was applied to the Eastern Europeans or the Slavs, okay, the Russians.
Because if you anything like me, you don't know nothing about no original language, you don't know nothing about no original religion, and you don't know nothing about your original name. My last name is Malone. That is an Irish last name.
And no offense to this brother, but you can tell that he hasn't been enlightened to certain information about the history of our people. Because in his mind, from a two-dimensional point of view, he still equates the world to just black, so-called white. And I'm pretty sure he equates European, which is a broad term, just to so-called white people or Caucasians. Or like he just stated, Irish. He believes that most likely that the Irish are nothing but so-called white or pasty pale people. Okay? But you have to research this and do your due diligence to understand that there were black Irish, there were black Scots, there were the original Saxons, the old Saxons, the different black dynasties, the Pleasanton dynasty, the Hanover, and so forth. I can go on, but you have to do that research yourself. But he's just stuck in this paradigm or this box, okay, of victimization. And that's another thing too, because when you really want to talk about reparations, that's not feasible, because now they're going to start to look at, okay, since you claim, or you so-called blacks claim to be X, Y, and Z, which type of black are you? Are you Aboriginal? Are you black European? Okay, the Jacobites. Okay, are you the Jews, the ones that came over here in the 1700s, or slave trade or whatnot, or you had other brews that were expelled from Spain and came over here to the Americas. So it's a lot of history. Our history is so copious. So right here, we're going to look at the book, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 by David McRitchie. Page 374, Ancient Modern Britons. Still, this does show these people to us in a stronger light than that in which they are placed by the 19th century writers. This tells us that England was overrun last century by large companies of marauders who soared upon the agricultural caste of England, much as they did in Ireland and Scotland, to the great terror of these agriculturalists. And these oppressors were black oppressors, like those of the Welsh Mabinogion, I'm pronouncing that right, the Englishmen who had colonized the western shores of the Atlantic not more than a generation or two before. Gross spoke of the Indians there as being black as gypsies. And this is from 1676, right? Let's read that again. Groves spoke of the Indians there as being as black as gypsies, meaning what? Swarthy. In 1676, the native races of New England were spoken of indifferently as Indians. And Moors. And our British Indians are also remembered as Moors. Therefore, Groves is virtually telling us that large companies of Moors or black people roamed up and down the country rather more than 100 years ago, taking very considerable contributions from the farming classes and others, besides being possessed of many fierce and aggressive qualities. And these Moors at that quite recent period had not relinquished the custom that distinguished those black people against whom Caesar, interesting, right, fought. Those 18th century Moors were also painted people. So that would be considered what? Roman Britain or Roman Briton. The distinguishing war paint of the 18th century Moors of Galloway was, we have seen, of a blood red color, derived from the hematite or ruddle that is found throughout Western Europe. It is almost certain that such killed clans were found in other parts of the British Islands hundreds of years ago and further back. But so far, there is no direct evidence of this. Okay. So, point blank period, that you did have Aboriginal or Indians or AKA Moors, because it's synonymous with Indian and Negro, or two synonymous definitions. Indian and Moor are synonymous, meaning what? They mean the same thing. The blue man, right? Now, when you do a simple Google search, this is how much the lie has been spread around the world, or misinformation, because they do not want so-called blacks to know about them being royal or the royal history. But this states many African Americans have Welsh surnames, including Jones, Evans, and Thomas, due to the variety of reasons. So it states possible reasons: slave traditions. Enslaved people may have adopted the surnames of their Welsh masters. That's false. Familiarity. Immigrants may have named new villages after places in Wales they knew. Anti-slavery groups. Welsh religious and anti-slavery groups helped slaves gain freedom. American heroes. Enslaved people may have chosen the surnames of American heroes or founding fathers, some of whom may have had Welsh origins. Sea captains, which is bogus. Enslaved people may have been named after sea captains or crew members on the ships they transported them to the Americas, and that's a bunch of bullshit. So right here it states, to return to the swarthy people, if the earliest races of Picts or Moors were expelled from the districts in which we now find dark people, or were wholly exterminated, there such people will become the probable descendants of the black strangers who overran our islands at a later date and thus the small swarthy Welshmen, the small dark Highlanders, and the black Celts to the west of the Shannon are as likely as not the living representatives of Danes, while on the other hand, it is evident that the Flemings, the Norsemen, Gentiles of pure color, the kin of Normans, and the Celtic tribes, represented by Prince Meredith, the Fion of tradition, and the barbarian prisoners. Okay, right here. The surname first given to the remote Arthurs, a surname signifying the black man. This is where you get the names like Brown or Douglas, the Black Douglases. Okay, a lot of your surnames really is based upon hereditary.
I know a lot of people named Jones, Williams, Jackson. None of those are indigenous black people names. Okay? So you were stripped of your original name. For the longest, we went to Christian churches and we prayed, and there was pictures of white people in Bibles. You grew up on the King James Version. That is a white Bible. You were stripped. You ain't grow up reading the Ethiopian Bible.
Sir, you're in error. King James was a so-called black man, believe it or not. Okay, well, what he's going to come to find out, or if he ever does find out, that the British Isles were ruled by a swarthy nation, okay, before the Caucasians or the wild men took over, and before the Black Plague, aka the bubonic plague, which killed majority of our ancestors in Europe, and eventually they took over. But no, not no Ethiopian. The Ethiopians are Hamitic. Christianity is a Hamitic religion, believe it or not. Even though our people adhered to that, a lot of our people back then knew that they were descendants of the 12 tribes, Jacobites, Israelites. But this notion that, your surname, well, I stated earlier in the video, those surnames, which are hereditary, are based 99.9 or 95%, on our lineage, not theirs. And I'll say this, it was through the age of discovery, through the black monarchs, that the Bible is spread all around the four corners of the earth. It was through people, our ancestors, the black nobility, is the reason why most of these nations have the Bible and people can pick it up and have access to read it. But he doesn't understand that because he believes that white people have always been in rulership. They're in rulership now, but during that time period, in the quote unquote dark ages, the medieval times, we were in rulership. We taught them the oracles and how to read and write and show them the Bible. Because remember, the quote unquote Edomites, they were a debased people. They didn't know the oracles or the Torah and whatnot, or the Tanakh of the Bible. They had to be taught that. And even in the ancient days as well, when they, converted proselytes or whatnot.
You were stripped of your cultural religion. You don't know what our forefathers practiced, what religion we practice. Okay, then there goes the language. How do you say good morning in indigenous black American? You don't know, because you were stripped of your cultural language. Now, the reason why they were unable to strip any other place that was colonized of their original language, their original names, and their original religion is because you cannot do that to a whole race of people in the land that they are indigenous to. It only makes sense. It only makes sense because we are the only people that got brainwashed. We are the only race of people who have been brainwashed. So it only makes sense that the only reason why they could do this to us, what they could not do to anyone else, is because they took us from our land, brought us to a land that we didn't know nothing about, and forbid us to speak our original religions. uh, our original languages, excuse me, forbid us to go by our original names, and forbid us to practice any original religion. They gave us the religion that they wanted us to have. They gave us the names that they wanted us to have. And they gave us the language that they wanted us to speak. And that's why we are the only race of people on the face of the earth that don't know nothing but what we know. This language, these names, and this religion. Everybody else know their whole history of their families and everything. We are the only people that got stripped of that because we were stripped from our land. We are not indigenous to this land. That's a proven fact. You cannot strip a person of all that. You cannot brainwash a man in his own land. The only way you can brainwash a man is if you take him from where he is originally from amongst his people and take him to somewhere else and forbid him to do so. It only makes sense. So all this stuff y'all coming with, we was already here, and you can walk to Africa through the Grand Canyon, and we had big cities and they came here. Why were they able to brainwash us? Y'all saying we are the only race of...
Well, I do believe that one of the reasons why they were able to take us down here and around other parts of the world is because of the fighting amongst ourselves. And if you want to get biblical with it, we disobeyed. We didn't follow the covenants of our forefathers, if you believe in the Bible per se. But, you know, a lot of in-house fighting. That's how they took over Europe. That's how they took over the British Isles and so forth. A lot of in-house fighting over bloodlines, blood ties, ancestral lands, and so forth. We do it still to this day. I don't believe you're from Africa. I mean, your name, your surname alone says a lot if you do any research on your last name. Because Africa is a continent and has many countries and over 2,000 or 3,000 languages. Okay, you got to be more specific than just saying that you're from Africa.
People on the face of this earth that was weak enough to get brainwashed. That's an insult to us. So they couldn't brainwash the Australian Aboriginals. They couldn't brainwash the Indians. They couldn't brainwash the Africans, but they brainwashed the fuck out of us because we don't know shit but what they taught us. It's crazy. It's crazy. So that's just something to think about, man. That's just something to think about. When I'm sitting up here talking about let's go back to Africa, and all y'all go in the comments talking about we ain't really from Africa, trying to debate me on some shit that you chose to believe that you just read somewhere. Because if you do a DNA test, your shit is going to go back to some tribe in Africa. Maybe a couple of tribes in Africa. And your blood is going to be 70, 80, even 90% fucking African. Yes, it is. So it just makes no sense. But you being part of the problem with that bullshit. So you gonna either make your own content and get the fuck out my comments with the dumb shit, or go with the goddamn flow. Cause I'm trying to unite my people. I'm with getting up out of here and going back. It ain't gonna happen overnight. It ain't gonna happen overnight. So y'all can go on with that negative bullshit. Now, if you want to sit here and keep insisting that we are indigenous to this land, which makes no motherfucking sense, that's on you. Don't be telling me to go ahead and go back and all this shit. Motherfucker, I'm trying to do what I can do. Don't worry about me. Worry about you. I'm worried about black people. If you ain't part of the solution, go ahead on with the bullshit. But you sitting over here with some books and some shit you done seen on the internet and you just chose to just run with that shit. Get the fuck out of here, man. Nigga, we come from fucking slave ancestry. You are African American, motherfucker. You are an African that was brought here by force and born in America through slave ancestry.
So right here, it states, page 16. The question of the origin of the so-called white races, which have now long held the supremacy in these islands, scarcely enters into the present inquiry which has to do more with their colored predecessors, like I stated earlier. So this dude doesn't know real history. He's using the victimization angle, or he just don't know. Right here it states, okay, while a fourth, as we see, hints that the home, if not the cradle of the so-called white race, was Europe, okay, but there seems little probability of any of these theories, meaning what? It hasn't been proved, okay? When Julius Caesar came onto the British Isles, he was finding indigenous Britain or British Indians, aka Moors or Negroes, the aboriginal tribes of the British Isles, right? Ever becoming substantiated. We have just seen that many scientific men hold that there are some grounds for believing that portions, at least of Europe, have been formerly inhabited by black, tawny, and copper-colored races. And we are also learning that the so-called white race has not always been confined to the Eastern Hemisphere, okay? Keyword, black, tawny, and copper-colored races. So now we're on page 40, right here. But our islands contain other races at that period. When the war with the Solors, who occupied territories in Southwest, brought them, the Romans, in contact with that people, Tacitus records the results of their observation. Their complexion was different and of a darker hue. Their hair was curly, and they resembled the Iberians, okay? So now we're on page 173, okay? Scotland was overrun in one district by Moors of the 15th century. But 5 centuries earlier, the kings of Alban were Moors, and one of the most celebrated of these, Kenneth, or the N-word, I'm not going to say it because if I say it, it might block my video, but you can spell it with 2 G's or 1. Or Dub ruled over certain districts known as the 3 Black Divisions. Long before and after that, the ascendancy remained with his swarthy nation. Okay? But at any rate, the Moorish races, okay, the Moorish races, Nec Falso Nomen Pictos, were among the chief opponents of the Romans when they marched through Britain 1800 years ago. Okay? I mean, to have this color, you have to be Aboriginal. I mean, in all land masses. So what were the 3 black divisions? England, North Ireland, Scotland, Wales. The dude said he had an Irish name of Malone. Okay, you didn't get that from no white man, sir. I'm sorry. So now we're on page 262. Okay. Therefore, if North Britain contained nothing but Picts and Scots at the time of the Roman invasion, I think it was 55 BC, it is pretty certain that it contained no white man at that date. So, copy and paste. You know, ancient really denotes the people of color. And eventually, you know, the Caucasian, like I said, their first rulership came to the Macedonians, took over Greece, the Roman Empire, the first 12 Caesars. After that, during the decline of after the imperial Rome, you had a lot of black emperors and so forth. And the gladiators were so-called black or men of color. They looked like Ethiopians and so forth, many different conquered tribes. Just like today, right? There's nothing new under the sun. When you see the NFL, the NBA, those are the modern gladiators, predominantly black or Negro. Okay. Page 221, black families in early Scotland. Okay. Thus, the tribe to which the name Douglas or Black Douglas eventually adhered identifies the early Scots and early Picts with one particular division of the modern gypsies, namely those inhabiting Callaway and other districts in south of Scotland. In a less marked degree, these races are identified with the dark whites. Of course, they're going to say that, of the same districts. You're always doing that. That's what the white man does, so-called white man. He likes to categorize dark whites. This is why they group the Ethiopians in the Caucasian race, which is a joke. But it is most remembered that this name originally meant nothing more than black man, the black man, and that it only clung to one special tribe by the same accidental process that has made such names as Black, Duffy, Duff, Dow, Brown, Don, Dunn, and others become the distinguishing surname of other families. Okay? So this dude stating that Jones and a lot of these Welsh names come from white people. No, sir. Do your research.